Gave the fantasy football season, and he has a few running backs I would mention this week. The first guy is Chase Edmonds of the Arizona Cardinals. So right here, this might not be a popular benching here this week, but I just don't like the matchup for Edmonds versus the Green Bay Packers this week here on Thursday Night Football. The Packers give up the 12th least amount of fantasy points to running backs. And let's be honest here, the last 3 games, we haven't seen much from Edmonds, in my opinion. Week 5 versus San Francisco, 6 carries, 15 yards. 3 catches, 19 yards receiving, and a fumble loss. Week 6 at Cleveland, 4 carries, 46 yards, 3 catches, 4 yards. And then week 7 versus Houston, 15 attempts, which was pretty high for him, but they were running the clock out, 81 rushing yards, and only 1 catch for 9 yards. So right here, a lot of weapons on this Arizona Cardinal team. Edmonds this season, he hasn't really been a factor, especially the last 3 weeks in the passing game here. Now with Zach Ertz in town, obviously A.J. Green, Christian Kirk having good years, and DeAndre Hopkins. And this game versus Green Bay, I just don't see him being much of a factor here, is Edmonds. And James Conner is the goal line back as well. So right here, it's going to be tough to start him. And I know there's a lot of bye weeks and injuries, but if you could afford benching Chase Edmonds, this would be the week to do it, in my opinion. The next running back is Antonio Gibson of the Washington football team. So obviously this shin injury is definitely bothering Gibson, that he's got a fracture in his shin, and we've seen the results go way down over the last 2 weeks. Week 6 versus Kansas City, 10 carries, 44 yards, 2 receptions for no yards and a fumble loss. And week 7 at Green Bay, 14 carries, 51 yards, and only 2 catches for 5 yards. So he's getting about 10 to 15 touches per game here as Gibson. But a lot of the game scripts as well haven't been going the Washington football team's way here in the last 3 weeks. And right here, it's a tough matchup at the Denver Broncos that give up the 8th least amount of fantasy points to running backs, even though I know last week we saw Dearness Johnson go for 146 yards on the ground versus them, but Gibson's not 100%. He's not getting the full workload like he did early in the season because of his injury. And this week, it's a tough matchup, and I would bench him if I have better options. The next running back is Mike Davis of the Atlanta Falcons. So Mike Davis here, it looks like he's not the man in that backfield, obviously, in Atlanta. Cordell Patterson, he's been putting up great numbers this season, and Mike Davis, he's falling out of favor right now the last few weeks here for this Falcon team. And last season, he was in a monster fill-in for Christian McCaffrey. We're putting up huge numbers, but this year here, he's just not cutting it. A couple touchdowns have salvaged his fantasy days over the last few weeks. Week 4 versus Washington, 13 carries for 14 yards, which is a joke. 2 catches, 12 yards, and a touchdown in that one. And then week 5 versus the Jets, 13 carries, 53 yards, a rushing touchdown, 2 catches, 8 yards, and a fumble loss. And then last week in Miami in week 7, 4 carries for 10 yards. So right here, like I mentioned, he's falling out of favor. Cordell Patterson's more versatile, where obviously he used to be a former wide receiver as well, and now he's a running back. So right here, Cordell Patterson's the guy to start over there in Atlanta. And right now, Mike Davis, he's pretty much on the fringe of being droppable with one more bad game this week. And I know he versus his former team in the Carolina Panthers this week, but they give up the least amount of fantasy points to running backs. And this week, I think it'll be Cordell Patterson once again. And the running back I would mention is Myles Gaskin of the Miami Dolphins. So right here, Gaskin, it's been a train wreck for most of the season here for Gaskin. And I know last week, a touchdown saved his fantasy day. 15 carries, 67 yards, 4 catches for 10 yards and a touchdown. But he's really only had 2 good fantasy days, week 7 and week 5. But right here, week 8 at Buffalo, I honestly don't see this Miami offense moving the football that effectively in this one here. And in week 2 at Buffalo, he didn't do much with Gaskin. 5 carries, 25 yards, and 4 catches for 21 yards. So I could see this game script going that way once again, where the Bills get off to an early 14 to 17 point lead, and where the Miami Dolphins have to abandon the run in this ball game and just keep putting it up for grabs. So right here, Gaskin, he's not producing good numbers. He got drafted in the 3rd or 4th round of many fantasy drafts, and I just don't like the matchup this week, and I would bench him. In the 5th and final running back I would bench this week, Melvin Gordon of the Denver Broncos. So right here, Melvin Gordon, it's been a decent fantasy season, but he's another guy as well here over the last couple weeks where the touchdown has bailed him out from having a bad fantasy day. So the last few weeks for Gordon, week 5 at Pittsburgh, 9 carries, 34 yards, 2 catches, 9 yards. Week 6 versus Vegas, 10 carries, 50 yards, 3 catches for 23 yards. In week 7 at Cleveland, the touchdown saved him. 8 carries, 18 yards, 2 catches, 14 yards with the receiving touchdown. In week 8 here, it's a mediocre matchup versus the Washington football team that give up the 14th least amount of fantasy points to running backs here. And in my opinion, Javonte Williams is the better running back. It seems like Williams is getting more goal line touches as well. And he's been more productive over the last 3 weeks here as well. So right here this week, I know if you're in a pinch, you might have no choice but to start Melvin Gordon. But this week, his ceiling's probably 11 to 12 points, and I would bench him. So that's a few running backs I would bench here in week 8 of the fantasy football season.